Hello, today we're tackling the second part of our trilogy about the history of France and India. In the previous part, we saw why France became interested in India. That interest led to the creation of the Royal East India Company in 1664, with the aim of establishing French commercial activity in the Indian subcontinent through several trading posts, following in the footsteps of other European powers, especially the Portuguese, the Dutch, and the British. After a tumultuous start that nearly led to the company's demise, the French learned from their missteps. And now, in 1740, they understand much better the ins and outs of Indian politics. Pondicherry emerges as the hub of French trade in India during this era. The trading post was fortified and had a capable garrison of Europeans and Sepoy, Indians trained and equipped in the French manner. The governor at the time, Pierre Benoit Dumas, is leading. He manages to obtain the Mansatbar title for the governors of Pondicherry. In essence, a theoretical vassal title from the Mughal Empire legitimized the French territorial presence, marking the rise of French power in India. Well, following all that, in 1742, while France is once again at war in Europe, participating in the War of the Austrian Succession, it's a certain Joseph-François Dupleix. Yes, I know there's a debate about the pronunciation, especially of the X, but usage and arguments based on his region mean that it should apparently be pronounced this way, despite counter-arguments for a different pronunciation. So it's Joseph-François Dupleix, who has been serving the company for over 20 years and knows the subcontinent well, who becomes governor of Pondicherry and commander-in-chief of the French establishments in India. He is the one who will rely on the relatively solid base he is given responsibility for in order to bring French India to its peak. But before following this rise, it's important to understand that at the time, the company was very closely controlled by the French government. Contrary to common simplifications, it was not merely a simple trading entity driven solely by private interests. The king thus held a fifth of the shares, and the company's administrative council was chaired by the representative of the king's Minister of Finance. This involvement is also clearly seen in the letters the company sent to its agents on site, where they were either thanked or dismissed. They often acted on behalf of the company, the state, the king, or even the French nation, as they said at the time. That being said, there were, of course, private investors, mostly made up at the time when Dupleix took office of French and foreign bankers, including English and Dutch, who also sat on the board of directors, with everything that implies. As a little anecdote, Voltaire also owned shares in the Royal East India Company. It is this configuration of strong state involvement and private, even foreign, interest that justifies the company's position aligning with the French government's strategy of appeasement, as well as a position compatible with the interests of the various investors. This led to a significant difference in perspective between the company's executives and field staff at the time. The company, via its instructions to Dupleix, appears to take a defensive stance in wartime, aiming to preserve the status quo without fully grasping the on-the-ground realities, to the point that it sometimes borders on the absurd, as you will see later. On the other hand, Dupleix has a practical but more abrasive perspective on the situation. He takes the side of establishing the strongest possible position in India. This, therefore, involves a dynamic local diplomatic strategy that he considers essential for safeguarding and strengthening the interests of the royal company in India, which, let us remember, operates in a hostile environment due to the strong presence of the British and the Dutch, combined with Indian political instability. The company's defensive withdrawn strategy contrasts with Dupleix's offensive approach, which was bound to lead to confrontation with European powers in the region. What is the company afraid of? To grasp the actions and reactions of the different players, you need to understand all of this. History has unfortunately led the state-run company to be directly involved in several strategic mistakes. In 1743, as the British were preparing to enter the War of the Austrian Succession, France effectively declared war on the United Kingdom in March 1744. On the minister's orders, the company is attempting to cut costs due to the ongoing war, which is already depleting its income. So he orders Dupleix to considerably cut the operating costs of the company's activities in India. Until now, that might appear quite logical. However, it orders to stop reinforcing Pondicherry's fortifications, just as the war draws near. Dupleix, expecting the European conflict to reach India, was reinforcing the defenses, particularly along the poorly protected waterfront. Luckily for the French, Dupleix obeys the general order to reduce expenses related to his responsibilities. He disobeys this order, even spending his own money to continue the preparations. In the same spirit, the company assigns Dupleix to remove the danger from the French trading posts, not by preparing them for war as you might have thought, but by seeking to establish a non-aggression treaty between the British English East India Company and the Royal East India Company, within which each side kindly promises not to bother the other in case of war between France and Great Britain. And I'm hardly exaggerating. Dupleix, even though he knows perfectly well that the British have no interest in this, are preparing for war and fear the rise of French power in India, still makes the probably wise choice for his position to obey this order. The pinnacle of French achievement in India. The French war fleet present in the region to protect French interests in the Indian Ocean is recalled by the minister, obviously counting on this neutrality agreement even before it was concluded. The British, for their part, cunning it must be said, drag out the discussions until their own fleet arrives in India, and open war breaks out in March 1744, allowing them in the process to pick up a few French ships that were left defenseless in the area. This exemplifies the divide between the metropolitan perspective and that of the French populace. You can picture Dupleix's expression upon hearing this latest news. The squadron meant to support him hated sailing while an English war fleet landed nearby. This was due to negotiations filled with good intentions, but known to be useless and even dangerous, naively imposed by the kingdom. Through the company, just to drive the point home, the letter from the company he received afterward, barely exaggerating, could be summed up like this. Fortunately, there is room to put things into perspective. Pierre-Benoit Dumas, former governor of Pondicherry, who resisted the Marathas during the 1740 siege, was the director in charge of Indian activities, and therefore, being well aware of the realities on the ground, truly seems to have done his best to make the minister understand that leaving French India in those conditions could be absolutely disastrous for the company. Thanks to him, some funds, munitions, and supplies reach Pondicherry. Though quite insufficient, it was still better than nothing, particularly in Dupleix's hands. In 1744, the War of Austrian Succession extends to India as France and Great Britain declare war on each other. To better grasp the realities of this conflict, remember that Europeans were not very numerous in India during that period. Historian Philippe Audrer counted a maximum of around 16,000, including the Dutch, who were the most numerous, followed by the British, Portuguese, and French. Our focus today, the French numbered no more than 1,800 in 1740. This includes administrative and commercial staff, and as you understand, their numbers were not increased in the meantime. In fact, the conditions are far from ideal for the French, but we shouldn't overestimate the English preparations either, which were more haphazard than one might think. The balance of power shifts in their favor when their war fleet and troops arrive. That's how it is. However, the qualities of two men will essentially allow the French to rebalance the situation, despite lacking a war fleet or reinforcements. Joseph-François Dupleix and Bertrand-François Meillet de la Bourdonnais, whom I will simply call La Bourdonnais from now on. The first one is already known, while the second was the governor of the Mascarene Islands, including Mauritius and Réunion Island. La Bourdonnais, now without a war fleet, will remain courageous in adversity, and he will put together an improvised squadron made up of a single warship and armed merchant ships. They quickly rescue the Indian trading posts and deal a heavy blow to the British by seizing the Madras trading posts with ease. However, capturing the city will cause a major dispute between Dupleix and La Bourdonnais. The first wants to keep the city to drive the British out of the region. The logic can be summarized as follows.
You are very nice, but I would rather see you there.
La Bourdonnais aims to ransom the British trading post. Amidst the confusion, Dupleix succeeds, leading to La Bourdonnais' departure with his impromptu squadron. Dupleix and his entourage will manage the remainder of the war well, despite the situation becoming considerably complicated once again. Thus, with only a few hundred men, 700 according to William Dalrymple, the French and their sepoy infantry win the Battle of Adyar, or Saint-Thomé, which in fact took place not far from the British trading post of Madras. They faced opposition from a regular Indian army of about 10,000 men, sent by the local Nawab, a British supporter. According to contemporary accounts and historians, this battle was extremely unbalanced, won by the superior discipline of the French troops, combined with successful maneuvers and well-controlled, particularly well-used firepower, creating panic in the Nawab's army, which resulted in a disorderly retreat of the Indians. According to some historians, this victory marks the first time a small European and sepoy contingent defeated a regular Indian army. The event was a pivotal moment for all European and Indian powers in the region, from which each would draw lessons. The Europeans expanded their influence, while the Indians strengthened their armies. However, in August 1748, as the conflict prolonged, the situation deteriorated for the French in India when 26 British ships emerged near Pondicherry. The trading post, which was the capital of French India, had been fortified and prepared for war by Dupleix, despite the orders of the company, as you can see on the screen. The British ships landed several thousand men to besiege the city by land and by sea. The seafront was fortified thanks to the foresight of Dupleix. He personally led the siege and handled it brilliantly. He managed to hold the city until October of the same year. As the rainy season forced the British and their Indian allies to withdraw, this gave the French a great victory. Meanwhile, in Europe, peace was signed through the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle in 1748. The Siege of Pondicherry, the final significant battle of the War of Austrian Succession in India, occurred months before the news reached the country. And the outcome is clear. The French have won the Channel and the British are not happy about it. Dupleix then implemented his vision of French India through dynamic diplomacy and with the help of competent men like General Labussy. Castelnau, who had been with the company for about 10 years and had arrived in Pondicherry 2 years earlier. For example, the latter is fluent in Tamil, the Indian language of the Pondicherry region. And he also took the time to study how Indian politics works, which he understands perfectly. On Dupleix's instructions, he will rely on Adyar's victory to demonstrate the value of French military intervention in the region. In fact, various local rulers and claimants, of course chosen for their compatibility with French interests, will call on the French, who gradually extend their influence in the territory they control, until, during the first half of the year 1751, they place someone on the throne of the Deccan, a claimant who is not only favorable to the French, but whose power will depend on the presence of a French contingent at his side. Moreover, he will have to finance it himself, which is doubly good for the company. Bussy Castelnau is thus ordered to pursue this and to stay with him with his troops in order to help him maintain his power. Bussy's qualities lead to him becoming a close advisor to those in power and being put in charge of the army, according to Dudecamp. When the Marathas attacked the state in 1752, just to be precise, while the Marathas had repeatedly defeated the troops of this state, in the past, Bussy Castelnau had meticulously studied Maratha warfare tactics and the structure of the Muslim army he led. Once again, the boy never appears as a tourist. He succeeds, allowing a kingdom that was very fragile to get through unscathed against the new Maratha power. All of this will, of course, worry and stir up the British, since from that year on, 1751, France effectively becomes the leading European power in India. Due to this and the previous war's setbacks, Islandais 1749, and over the following years, they took several measures to strengthen their position. And the instructions from the British government to the English East India Company are clear. Do everything possible to avoid giving the French free rein in India. They fortify their trading posts, dispatch royal officers to 3, including Madras, and reinforce their entire garrison. The British are getting ready for the upcoming direct confrontation, and despite their strong criticism of Dupleix's approach, They are heavily influenced by it, of course. All that being said, let's be clear, since that's one of the questions you asked me. It appears Dupleix doesn't envision a traditional French colonial empire in India. As I explained to you earlier, his goal is to allow the company to have the strongest possible position in India. Trading and generating income enables control over an otherwise hostile and unstable environment. This requires the company's political, diplomatic, and military commitment. And that's why he wants to work with the local states, whoever they may be, in order to spare the company a lot of trouble. As he says, he is a pragmatic man and an excellent company agent who, in his own words, does not separate the company's interests from those of France. He views himself as a representative of his company and nation, not as a conqueror of India. France reached its peak in India during 1753 and 1754, as shown on the screen. However, the company makes a decision at this point that will have dire consequences. They recall Dupleix, whom they deem too reckless. As early as 1752, the King's Commissioner, who chairs the company's board, made it abundantly clear to Dupleix the government's wish, which sounds almost like a warning, and which he sums up in a letter as follows. We only want a few small settlements to help and protect trade. No victory, no conquest, lots of goods, and some increases in dividends. From then on, India and France entered a new phase of its history. Dupleix's successor, Godot, is much more in tune with the mindset of the government and the company, and he will be content to manage, without Dupleix's talent, what the latter had achieved. Thus, he signs a treaty with the British, once again full of good intentions, once again following the orders of the company, but which today, once again, could be considered naive, as it consisted of establishing a sort of status quo, with each side dividing up commercial zones and agreeing not to interfere in the affairs of the Indian states. Unfortunately, it turned out to be a real fool's bargain, as can be seen from the correspondence between the English East India Company representatives on site and their home country. Their real intentions are absolutely beyond doubt, and the British move their pawn despite this agreement. Under the leadership of Robert Clive, inspired by the methods of Dupleix that the British had previously criticized, and at the initiative of the British Crown, the British move their pawn and are determined to take their revenge. This opportunity arises when war breaks out again in 1756, with the famous 7 Years' War, for which French India is prepared. Contrary to what one might think, and which will be discussed in the next episode, to make sure you don't miss it, don't forget to subscribe and click on the little bell. I want to thank all of you who support our work with likes, comments, the messages you send us, and the generous donations you make to us. Find all useful links in the bibliography in the description on Utip and Typee, as usual. And with that, I'll see you very soon.